me, my associate in the dean's office, Mindy Capaldi, and then Ravi Shankar, who's the unit head for mathematics. So we all overlapped, although none of us knew when we were there, because we worked in different directorates. So you get kind of a perspective of a lot of different things. We also have some people with experience at NIH as well. So there's lots of folks you can ask and talk to, and of course all the folks at sponsored programs, right? So we're all in this together. And I'll echo what Lauren said. I think the worst thing that we can do moving forward is to show a severe decrease in proposal pressure at the NSF, because then that'll just justify the cuts, right? So we want to, I think it's important for us to keep submitting proposals and so forth, recognizing that the funding rate is going to go down, but that doesn't mean we won't get funded, right? The only proposal that you know is not going to get funded is the one you don't submit. So, having said that, let me talk just a little bit about the NSF, and folks might know some or all of this, and that's okay, but I just want to make sure I'm covering bases here. So the NSF is composed of directorates, and in terms of the science world, this is basically 8 major science directorates. There's also an administrative one, but I didn't put it up here. And that's biological sciences, computer and information science and engineering, education, STEM education, engineering itself, geosciences, mathematical and physical sciences, social, behavioral, and economic sciences, and technology, innovation, and partnerships, which was created just a couple of years ago. So that's the newest one. I was the program officer in Geo, Ravi Shankar was in MPS, and Mindy Capaldi was in EDU. So it's sort of similar. The setup is kind of similar to what you're familiar with in terms of academics, right? Each directorate is sort of like a college, almost a theme area. And within that college are things like divisions, right? Which are almost like departments. That was Mindy's analogy, and I think it's appropriate. So for example, if you were to go to the webpage for geosciences, I'm going to use geo as an example because that's what I'm most familiar with. If you were to go there, under the director for geosciences, there are divisions. There are basically 4 main ones, and then one of them is an office, but there's the division of atmospheric and geospace, earth sciences, which is where I was, ocean sciences, research, innovation, synergies, and education, which kind of catches a bunch of other stuff that's going on, and then polar programs, which is its own entity, because polar programs, it's just a weird beast. It's a little bit different. They basically run McMurdo Station in Antarctica, and they do the Arctic program as well. So they're kind of their own special thing. But that's kind of the idea of the divisions within the directorate. And then each of those divisions is going to have programs, right? And these are your funding opportunities. So, you know, in EAR, they've got their own programs. I'll show you in a minute what some of those are. But the other thing you can see when you go to some of these web pages is there's a whole lot more information. Learn more about EAR. You can get email updates, right? So you get sort of things coming in your inbox with opportunities, career opportunities, which are a little weak right now, but anyway. But also you have things like, you know, award maps, what things have been awarded. You can search previous awards. You can go in there and kind of find out what they've been funding and what are some topics. Go ahead.
Can I give a shout out for the email updates? We're seeing a lot of the divisions holding some events about how their funding priorities are shifting. So we, in my offices, try to attend those when we can, but we can't cover them all. So I would strongly recommend that so that you can go to a lot of them hold office hours.
Yeah, and I'm actually on a bunch of these different ones. So I get them from biology, I get them from EAR, I get them from engineering, I get them from lots of different places just to see what's going on. You know, and then they'll often have updates and things that are going on down there as well. So worth looking into. So continuing down that, sort of drilling down that approach, within EAR then you've got a whole host of programs. So you've got CSEP, just like any other government agency, they love acronyms. Okay, they love acronyms that sound silly. So there's CSEV, chemical evolution, there's life and time, or LET, there's SPICY, which is what they call it, right, which is structure and physics of the solid earth, there's WALS, geoinformatics, that's a little more straightforward. EAR postdoc fellowships, so the postdoc fellowship program is still operational as far as I know. And then centers for solid earth geohazards. The one that I am currently in the process of submitting to is WALS. And so water landscape and critical zone processes. And if you were to go to that website, this is what it would look like. So this is a program website. It has a dedicated solicitation. Okay, so that's the announcement for the competition for the program. You can basically download it as a PDF if you want, or there's a web presence as well. And so when you go down and look at it, you'll see a few things, right? What's the due date for the competition? A lot of general competitions now actually don't have due dates anymore. Proposals can be accepted any time, but that's not true for all things. Careers, of course, have a due date, as well as things like MRIs and so forth. So you want to make sure you know what you're dealing with when you're starting to put your proposal together. Absolutely read the solicitation, right? That tells you the nuts and bolts of what's going on. It'll give you a little synopsis, and it'll give you any updates that might be going on. Now, I'll click on that in a minute. The other thing that's important to know is who are your program contacts? In other words, who are the program officers that are going to be shepherding the review process for your proposal, and then making recommendations on whether to fund it or not. These are your contacts for the people you might want to reach out to explore whether your idea is relevant for that program. Okay. When I was a program officer, we got contacts all the time from PIs or prospective PIs who wanted to sort of pitch their idea and see whether it was appropriate for the program. And we encouraged it. I mean, that was part of our job. Was talking to people and hearing what they want to do, and we can't tell them how to write their proposal, but we can tell them whether what they're thinking is relevant and appropriate for that program, or whether another program might be better. Oftentimes, sort of cross-cutting or cross-disciplinary ideas or projects might ultimately get funded by more than one program. We used to do that all the time. We would share an award. Back then it was tectonics. Tectonics would share the award with geochemistry or something like that if it had components of both. That's sort of an internal conversation that program officers have, but you generally want to submit your proposal to the program that's the most aligned with what you want to do. So, and these are the folks that you want to be asking. As alluded to by Lauren, most of these have webinars, right, where they describe what's going on in the program. Almost all programs that I know now do this, and those are really worth getting on board and listening to as you're thinking about a proposal, because that's the program officer's opportunity to really tell you how they're thinking about the funding in their program. The other thing here, notice this, right? Interested in reviewing proposals for WALS, complete our reviewer survey here. One of the best things you can do, and I'm sure I'll mention this again later, is if you want to learn how the proposal review process works, if you want to have a chance to see how other people are writing proposals to this program and what they're highlighting, reviewing proposals is one of the best things you can do. It's a really good way to get your feet wet and get experience with the whole NSF process. The other thing you can do is serve as a panelist. Usually, and I'll get to this a little bit later, usually you start by doing what are called ad hoc reviews, which is just you're invited to review one proposal, you write it up and you send it back in. Panels are when a group of people get together and review a whole host of proposals simultaneously and then discuss relative merits. So those are two different ways you can kind of get involved. And then, you know, frequently asked questions, dear colleague letters, which sort of talk about developments in the program, things like that. So things worth looking at. And then again, browse projects, this is worth looking at. You won't see the whole proposal, but you will see the sort of, almost the abstract, the synopsis for what they've funded. And it's usually a 2-paragraph synopsis, sort of the main ideas and then some details about how they're actually going to do what they're going to do. So it's kind of like an abstract, a little bit different, but that'll give you an idea of sort of what's been getting funded. The map of recent awards, that just kind of shows you where globally these awards are coming from. That's not quite as useful, I don't think. Anything you want to add anything to that? Yeah, related programs, so on and so forth. But this is sort of when you're starting to hone in on what you want to, where you want to submit your proposal, these are the pages you go to, and the solicitation is, let me just click on that while we're doing it. So what does the solicitation show you? It'll give you these specifics about how you apply to the program. Title, synopsis we've seen, again, program officers, where it's coming from, award type, standard or continuing grant. There are two types of ways the NSF funds it. One, they commit the money all at once, and one, they commit the money yearly, and that's an internal decision. That's not really up to the PI. But this gives you an idea of what they might be expected to be awarding. 60 to 80 proposals with a funding amount of $23 million, which seems really, really high. I don't know whether that's really true anymore, but it'd be, nice if it were. Institute of Higher Education can submit proposals, so you're all good there. No restrictions on PIs, no restrictions on numbers of proposals from an organization. Some programs, some competitions like MRI, a major research infrastructure, you can only submit 2 or 3 from an institution. And then you have to have internal competitions at your institution if there's multiple people that want to submit a proposal to figure out which one might be the most competitive. Yeah?
Is the anticipated funding amount per project, or is that
No, that's the total amount, and then you saw 60 to 80 projects, so that would be divided into that number of projects. Yeah. Wouldn't that be great if they funded 60 projects at $23 million apiece?
If I could add one thing,
Yeah.
we are seeing solicitations change frequently. So if you save a PDF of it, do often go back and look at the solicitation, because we have seen broadening participation, language changing, things like that going on. The other thing is if something moves to archived or not accepting proposals at this time, don't panic. Like I know the PHY, the fifth solicitation, is in that status right now. That's a reach out to the program officer situation, because they can either help you find a new program, or we've seen a lot of them where they say, yes, it's inactive right now, we're changing it and there'll be a new one out in a few weeks or a few months.
Yeah, it is. And I suspect this fall will be lots of things will be in flux with the new budget and all that sort of stuff being done. So, I'm not going to go through all of this, but the other thing I'll mention is there are 2 ways to submit proposals. Well, there are 2 government mechanisms through which to submit proposals. One is through research.gov, which is, I think, probably how most people do it. It's how I do it. You can also go through grants.gov. It's always been a little clunkier in grants.gov because that's a broader, it's not as focused as research.gov. So probably, this is the one I'm going to highlight and the one I'm going to kind of show you a little bit.
OSP will prefer research.gov.
Cool. All right, so that's a little bit about programs. The other thing to know about is there's a nice webpage at the NSF called Funding at NSF, and they've got a lot of good things for you to sort of look at and get information from, right? Tips for finding funding, preparing your proposal, submitting it, research approaches, general information about the NSF, a little bit about how we make funding decisions, which can be a little bit different based on which directorate, which division and program you're going through, but you know, search for funding, search for project awards, all that stuff. So it's a web page that's worth looking at to familiarize yourself with sort of the whole nuts and bolts of the NSF. Okay, proposal process. Any questions on any of that before? Fire hose? Yeah. It is kind of. But there are a lot of people that have a lot of experience investing, I mean,
So,
years. So.
I just have a lot of questions. That's,
Yeah.
how clinically minded is the NSF versus strictly bench science?
So, in your world, there's the NSF and the NIH,
Yeah.
right? And so, whereas in some other science or engineering disciplines, the NIH isn't nearly as big of a player. What I would suggest doing, because I'm not as much of an expert in that either, but talk to some other folks in your world, talk to the, you know, I'm trying to think about who would be some of the best ones to talk to over there. People who are getting funding.
Yeah, Mark Gabriel's done some stuff.
Mark's done some stuff,
Keith
Morgan's
Walker, I think's
doing some
Ray,
stuff. Ray Yankee's doing some stuff, you know, to kind of find the sweet
Okay.
spot between those. So, yeah, I'm probably not the best one to ask about that. It's a good question.
The other thing you can do is put together a one-page summary of what your project is.
Okay.
And there's no rule that says that you can't circulate that to multiple people.
Because I mean, I could frame it in a couple of different ways.
Right.
It's just,
Yeah.
what do they want? It's kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I can go very clinical if you want, I can go very bench science.
Yeah.
But it's just-
yeah, and that's actually the sort of question that program officers are usually really good about. So if you were to write up, as Lauren said, a one-pager about your ideas and then reach out to program officers and they'll give you a rough idea about, well, this part of your proposal is probably not what we would focus on, but this part is, you know, you can do that
Okay.
sort of thing.
And you can do that for the NSF, and we can help you find an NIH program officer. And then after getting feedback from both, kind of say, okay, where do I want to go?
Okay, that's good.
And if this one doesn't work, you say, all right, next year I'm gonna go with that one, you know, right? So. Okay, generally, the process, this is a slide I stole from Mindy Capaldi, and she obviously stole it from somewhere too. But anyway, right, 3 main phases. Preparation and submission of proposal, review process, and if you're fortunate, the award process. And so, I'm not going to talk as much about this, we'll talk some about this and some about this. But, you know, opportunity announced, proposal submitted, it's like one bullet, but yet that one little jump here from one square to the other is, you know, months, right, of preparation. Right, deciding what you want to do, finding the right opportunity, putting together your proposal, which has multiple parts, and then submitting it. So this is a lengthy process, a lot enough time to do it. Make sure OSP is linked in this process too, so they're aware of everything that's going on, because there's internal approval processes here at JMU as well. As far as the review, right, once your proposal gets submitted, as long as it is not rejected without review, it just means you screwed something up in the submission process, so don't do that. Then the NSF, the program officer that you submitted to, is going to find reviewers to review your proposal, and these are peers. These are other academics and professionals in the community that are going to read your proposal and rate it. And I'll go into a little bit on what sort of things they will rate your proposal on. There are two, like I said, there's 2 styles of review that are generally used at the NSF. One is called an ad hoc review, and that is basically where a program officer mails a specific proposal to you as a reviewer, says, please review this and send your review, well, you do it online now, but submit your review back to me by X date. Okay, and I've got one sitting on my desk that I've got to do by the middle of September. That's called an ad hoc review. It's just one person reviewing one proposal. Now, the program officer is going to send your proposal out probably to 6 to 8 ad hoc reviewers, okay, to get a number of those reviews back in. And then they'll rate it basically on a 5-point scale. Sometimes they allow half points, depends on the program. But basically, the best is excellent, that's a 5. Very good is a 4. Good is a 3. Fair is a 2. And poor is a 1. Okay? And then sometimes they'll do halves in between. Let's be honest, 2s and 1s, you're not getting funded. 3, you're probably not getting funded. 4s and 5s are what you're looking for, hopefully. The other type of review then, and a number of programs will do both of these, is called a panel review. And a panel review is where the program officer will get together maybe 10-ish experts, and it's all done remotely now, so it's all done on Zoom. It used to be somewhere remote, somewhere virtual, and somewhere in person. Now everything's virtual. But they get about 10 people together, and those 10 people look at a whole group of proposals that have been submitted to that program. And whereas the ad hoc review, you're just reviewing that one proposal based on how good you think the science in the proposal is going to be. When you do a panel review, you're actually comparing the proposals. So you may have 15 proposals to review, and you're actually looking at them, and you're talking about relative merits of each of them. You're still probably going through and maybe giving them rankings, but at the end of the day, at the end of the panel, then you have to decide what are the best of those proposals, what are the next best of those proposals, what are the ones that probably aren't good enough yet to be funded. So one is just a single review, the other is actually reviewing a whole bunch of them collectively. And like I said, different programs use different review approaches. Some are only ad hoc. I think that's less common. Some are only panel, and that's actually relatively common because what they do is they just have each panelist do an ad hoc review as part of the panel before they come to the panel. So you kind of get to the same result. And a lot of them are both. They'll do both ad hoc and panel. Okay, reviews come in, panel looks at it, panel ranks the projects, and then the program officer with that information makes recommendations for funding. Notice this does not say the program officer funds the projects. They make a recommendation that works its way up the chain. Okay, so they make a recommended decision about who should be funded and who should not, and this completely depends on how much money they have available. Okay? There are a lot of times you can have really, really, really good proposals that rank really highly, and they don't get funded because there just isn't any money. Okay, so it's completely dependent. Every division, every program has a budget, and that's what they can spend. So recommendations then go up. The first place they go is to the division director, the person that oversees the division, and they don't usually make, it's rare that they actually change a program officer's recommendation, but they will start to do other things like making sure that everything was considered, making sure that there aren't any red flags with anything like that. It's just sort of a layer of checking to make things your ducks are in a row. And then there's actually, I'm going to take this and go down here, because the next thing that happens is it goes up to the budget office at the NSF, Division of Grants and Accounting, and they're actually the ones that make the award. And they make sure that everything's hunky-dory with your institution, because the awards go to the institution, not to the PI. So they make sure everything's hunky-dory with the institution, everything's in place that needs to be in terms of agreements between the government and the institution for funding, and then ultimately it'll get finalized. So there's a lot of steps after the review process before something gets awarded. It can take a while, and things can sit in limbo land for a long time. Okay? Okay. I stole this from a slide that came out of one of those NSF webinars that program officers ran. And I thought this was actually a really nice, concise way to think about a proposal, right? Remember, you're pitching your idea to your reviewers. Yeah, you're pitching it to your program officer, but if the reviewers don't give it high marks, the program officer's not going to recommend it, right? So you're pitching your proposal to your peers in the community, to reviewers. What do they want to know? What's it about? Be clear, right? How are you going to do it? Can you do it, right? This is your background, your experience, and the facilities that are available to you, both at the university and in any sort of collaborating groups that you've linked in. And, you know, should we really put money behind this or not? And yeah, that's pretty much what you're talking about, right? What you're doing. What is wrapped up in this is, right, it's kind of all you need to do, but you need to be convincing, okay? You need to write well, you need to have it well structured and well organized, and you need to have a compelling argument for why this is important to do, why you're the person or the team to do it, and why somebody should spend the money to make it happen. So a lot of times, almost every proposal I've written, there's a good idea in there. Okay? A lot of times proposals break down because they're not, it hasn't been written in a way that's convincing enough to me that, number one, I understand all the components of what they want to do, and number two, I'm convinced that it can be done. Sometimes I think, yeah, this is a good idea, but it's just not as good idea as that good idea, right? There is that too, because you are competing against the other proposals at some point. Stop me at any point if you've got things you want to question or add. This was also mentioned earlier, but these are the sorts of things that I get in my inbox when I'm on those web feeds, okay? So this is an example for a virtual office hour, how to write a great proposal from Division of Environmental Biology, right? This one's coming up on September 9th, 2025. Almost always for these things, you have to register ahead of time in order to get the Zoom link to join. So just because you have this in your inbox, or you get this in your inbox, if you really want to do it, make sure you register for the webinar, right? Because otherwise, you're not going to get the Zoom link to go do it. That's their way of sort of policing the Zoom links. But yeah, these are the kind of things that happen these days all the time. Everybody is putting these things out all the time because there's so much in flux. And in fact, EAR does one of these webinars like every month, every 2 months, something like that, and I just keep getting them. A lot of times there isn't a lot of new information in there, but sometimes there is. So these are worth looking for and looking at.
And some of them are recorded, so even if you can't make it,
That's
sometimes
right.
you can go back and watch the recording afterwards.
Yeah, not always, but a lot of times they are.
And some of the virtual office hours, sometimes it's an overall presentation by the program officer, but sometimes they also break it up and you can meet with the program officer one-on-one to talk about your ideas.
Yeah, that's the way EAR usually does it, is they'll then break off into the different programs and you can meet with a specific program officer for specific questions. Okay, I'm not going to talk a whole lot about this because I'm not the expert, they are. But keep in mind that part of this process is, of course, the JMU end of the process. Going through sponsored programs, they will help you develop proposals, or at least find proposals. They'll help you a lot of the logistics of actually getting the pieces together to submit the proposal. JMU has an internal approval form that is now processed via Cayuse, which is the way they do most of that thing now. So it's all online, it's all electronic, which is fantastic. Some of the components that have to go into your NSF proposal, things like your bio sketch, biographical sketch, right? Short biographical sketch, your current and pending support, some conflict of interest stuff. you have to use specific websites to work with the NSF, and it goes through this group called CNCV, whatever it is. It's a medical website, but anyway, they process all that stuff, so. Talk to OSP, they can help you through all this stuff that's gotta be done. Get them in the loop early. Don't wait till the last minute, because none of us have the bandwidth to do this stuff at the last minute. You don't, they don't, so. But you'll be talking more about that stuff as you go through this series.
You know, ORD and OSP are both very happy to help. As soon as you reach out to OSP, they will assign a grant specialist to you, who will work with you on your budget and your needs. And the other reason to reach out is everything is in flux and we stay on top of it. Starting in July, for example, you now have to do your research security training before you can submit a proposal. That's a new rule effective October 1. We keep on top of that so that it doesn't come down to the last minute and we say, sorry, you've got a training that's a few hours that you need to do.
Yeah, so that's just make sure everybody knows what's going on. Make sure your unit head knows what you're planning to do as well, right? So keep people in the loop. This is the manual for all things NSF in terms of submitting proposals. It's the PAPG, the Proposal Award Policies and Procedures Guide. It is lengthy, but it talks about everything you need to know and you need to do in terms of writing proposals. Having said that, yeah, it's the ultimate syllabus. This is, you know, they update this every year at least, and it's got everything you need to know about writing proposals in it. Having said that, there are a lot of solicitations, right? A lot of programs that actually have specific requirements in addition to the PAPG requirements. So you got to look at both of those. You got to look at PAPG for general stuff, and then see if there's any specific things in your program that you're submitting to that you need to make sure you also include. For example, one of the things you have to include on NSF proposals, if you are funding a postdoc, you have to have a postdoc mentoring plan. Now across the NSF, at least in the science divisions, you have to have a graduate student mentoring plan if you're including graduate students. And in earth sciences, this is specific to earth sciences, you have to have an undergraduate mentoring plan if you're including undergraduates in your proposal. All right, but that's only earth sciences, that's not across the foundation. So those are the things you got to keep an eye open for. You also have to have a field safety plan now if you're going into the field. Okay, so how do you submit a proposal, right? Once you've got all these pieces together, well, you go through research.gov. That's how we prefer to do it. And when you go to research.gov, you get to a page that looks like this. Right now, they have not implemented the 15% IDC change. Who knows whether that's going to happen with the new thing, but right now we don't have to worry about that. Anyway, so there are notifications up here. Any NSF website also has, well, I guess research.gov doesn't. The other ones, I just want to highlight one other thing at the NSF. There's two little tabs up here that are now at the top of the NSF website. Learn about updates on NSF priorities and implementation of recent executive orders. Those two things I check all the time now because things are always in flux and always changing. So if you're curious about things that have been going through the news and changing, it's worth taking a look at those. Okay, research.gov. So, right, panels go through here, reporting if you have awards go through here, opportunities go through here, but this is the part here for preparing and submitting proposals. First thing you got to do is get yourself an NSF ID.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Yep.
So I saw in the login, GovID, right, if you already, because I've done NIH proposals, right, like would that allow you to log in? Or do you still have to create an NSF separate?
Some of them do, some of them don't.
Okay.
You just see, it's not a big deal.
No, yeah, I was just kind of questioning.
And then you'll notice, you're familiar with this. Okay. Okay, so once you're in, then this is sort of for proposals where you want to be going. Prepare and submit proposals. Prepare new in progress. Okay, so I actually have one in progress, and it's this one here. It's called collaborative research because I'm doing this with another institution. So if you're collaborating, you know, if a co-PI, if you have a PI at two different institutions, you just title it with collaborative research, and this is what we're going to do. We're going to look at the IRSI sheet, and we're going to do field analyses and cosmonuclides to try and figure out the glacial history of Central Ireland.
Question about the collaborative stuff.
Yeah.
I don't want to get into all the benefits of doing collaborative research and thing. How are collaborative proposals viewed by the NSF? Is that better or worse, or is it just apples and oranges? It doesn't.
It's apples and oranges. I don't think it matters one way or the other.
Okay.
If that's the best way to do the project, because you have two experts that want to work on it, it's totally fine. A collaborative proposal, you know, when you add the budgets for both institutions, they can get a little more expensive, right? So that can be an issue. But generally, this is so common that it's just relative merit of the work.
Since I'm asking questions, I got your attention. Is funding divided amongst geographical boundaries, or by undergraduate versus R01 versus R02, or is it purely on merit? We've got a budget for the East Coast, a budget for the West Coast, or something else like that.
Your NSF program officer is encouraged to have a diversified portfolio of funding, okay? So what that means is they don't want to only fund R1s, they don't want to only fund PUIs, they want to be really involving the whole spectrum of researchers. They don't want to only fund East Coast or West Coast or Chicago. They try and diversify that stuff as much as they can. So, yeah.
You say that you're working on a grant with another institution,
Mm-hmm.
but is that another US-based institution, or it's based outside of the US, and are you submitting
It's a
two
US
different-
institution.
Okay, and you're just submitting one proposal and not two separate ones?
They are linked. They're
They're-
linked proposals, okay? So what happens is, if you have a collaborative thing, the two institutions will link the proposal,
Okay.
and so there's one narrative, which is the description of the proposal, there's one project summary, there will be a separate budget for each institution with a separate budget justification for each institution, and there'll be each PI at each institution will have to do their own biographical sketch, current and pending funding, all that stuff. So the sort of nuts and bolts documents are separate for each institution, but the description of the work is one for both of them.
And this is something that OSP is more than happy to walk through figuring that out. We do this all the time. And if I may go back to the earlier thing, if you are looking at kind of flagging your proposal as not being from an R1 research institution, many programs allow what are called RUI proposals, which kind of helps you identify, say, that you are doing research at a primarily undergraduate institution.
Yeah, RUI is research at undergraduate institutions. Again, I don't want to go into the weeds on this, but just to give you an idea what it looks like when you go into submitting a proposal, you know, here's the solicitation, here's the program, this is the basic information, that's me. Separately submitted by multiple organizations, in other words, that means that it's collaborative. We are not the lead one on this. Rowan University is my colleague there, so there's always a lead institution. But then, you know, has the due date for the proposal. But then these are the things that you need to put in, right? You gotta put in a budget. You gotta put in a budget justification that describes the components that are in the budget. These are done in collaboration with OSP. Senior personnel doc, I'll go back there in a minute. Then there are sometimes other optional things you can add in here as well. You can suggest reviewers, you can suggest not to put certain people on there. But the other thing that you yourself are gonna, oh yeah, before I get there. Facilities, so you need to have a document that describes the facilities available at your institution that you will be using, that are available to you to use on the project. And reviewers will look at this, because they'll want to make sure if you say you're going to do cosmogenic nuclide analysis at JMU, they want to make sure you've got the equipment to do it, which we don't, which is why I have a collaborator. So these are the things that each PI will have to do, okay? Your biosketch, your current and pending support, collaborators and other affiliations, synergistic activities, okay? So these are all just things that need to be part of the proposal, and reviewers will look at, what's your background, can you do this? Are you overloaded with too much going on? They usually don't worry about that too much because we tend to keep an eye on that internally as well. What else you got going on that's somewhat relative, and this is all just part of your background. But reviewers do look at this stuff, so. Okay, that's all I'm going to do and go into in terms of research.gov and parts of a proposal. OSP will help you a lot with putting this stuff together. And you can always reach out to somebody like me or somebody who's done a lot of this stuff if you've got questions. I'm more than happy to answer questions.
OSP and ORD both, we work closely together, the two offices.
Okay, I'm running out of time, but I want to briefly talk about the review process. NSF has two main components that they look at. One is intellectual merit. How important is the proposed activity to advancing knowledge, qualifications of the PI, the institution, etc. Broader impacts. How does the proposed activity benefit society or advance societal outcomes? In other words, not just who will benefit and how, but why is it important to everybody else, okay? It's not just about how important this is to my colleagues in glacial geoscience, right? It's, this is interesting stuff for the general public. It describes the landscape, it describes what's going on. What are you going to do to sort of make them aware of what you're doing? How are you going to interact with the people, right? That sort of thing. You also need to have, all proposals need to have a management plan for any data and samples that are going to be collected as part of the project. You have to put that in there. Like I said, postdoc mentoring plan, if you have any postdocs, you have to include that. Student mentoring plans, grad student, and in some cases undergrad student, field safety protocols and things. These sorts of things, make sure you look at the solicitation to find what else you need to make sure is in there as part of your proposal. If you are going to be using analytical facilities like the analytical lab at Purdue or something like that, you'll also have to have a letter from Purdue saying, I'm going to support this proposal, okay? Or I'm going to collaborate with the PIs on this project. One of the red flags for a reviewer is, if I say in my proposal, I am going to do analysis using the facilities at Brookhaven National Labs, and there's no letter from Brookhaven National Labs that says, yes, I'm agreeable to collaborate on this proposal, that's going to get flagged. Okay, I already talked about this, right? You can do there are ad hoc reviews, panel reviews, and combinations of them, so I'm not going to go into that anymore. This one I stole from an NSF webinar slide as well. There are 5 components to each of intellectual merit and broader impacts. 5 things, right, that every proposal needs to, every review needs to consider on a proposal. What is the potential for the proposed activity to advance knowledge in terms of intellectual merit, benefit society, or contribute to specific societal outcomes for broader impacts? The rest of these are the same for both of these, okay? To what extent are things original, creative, and potentially transformative? Is the potential for carrying out the proposed well-reasoned, well-organized, based on the sound rationale? Does it incorporate a mechanism to assess success? We used to call this closing the loop, right? What are you going to do? How are you going to do it? How are you going to know if it's successful? Right? That's assessing success. How well qualified is the individual, team, or institution? Right? That's all your background stuff. And do you have what you need to do it? Those are the 5 things that go into both intellectual merit and broader competence. Okay, negotiations. If you get to this negotiation stage, you're halfway there. What that means usually is the program officer would love to fund your proposal. It probably reviewed well. They don't have the money to give you everything you want. So you try and figure out, is there a middle ground, right? Where you can find, where you can get to where you need to be to get at least the bulk of what you want to do done. So a lot of times, if you get contacted by a program officer that wants to talk about your proposal, that's good. It means you didn't get thrown in the dumper right away, okay? Often there will be some budget negotiations going on. They just don't have enough money for everything. Sometimes, and this has happened to me a couple of times, they'll actually say, look, I want to share your proposal with this other program officer in another program because some of what you want to do is relevant to their stuff. But they want some more information before they're willing to commit their program funds to help fund your proposal. So I'll get a list of questions and I'll say, hey, this person would really like you to answer these questions. If you don't answer them, you ain't getting funded. That's pretty obvious, right? So you try and address it as much as you can because somebody else may be helping to fund your proposal. If your proposal involves human subjects, okay, you have to have IRB approval to do it, and so they may come back and ask you for that. You're going to have to get this no matter what. This is often true for educational research. You talk about civil stuff, right? I mean, this is often a part of that. GMU has an IRB board that looks at these sorts of things, and you'll have to send a proposal through IRB and actually get an IRB number before you'll get the money. So.
If I can add that third one, revision to project activities. We're seeing a lot of people coming in asking, am I quote unquote allowed to do certain activities anymore, especially when it comes to broader impacts. That's somewhere where they can come back and say, hey, we want this tweaked a little bit, or we want to make sure that you are engaging a broad enough spectrum of the community or whatever. And so sometimes that stressing too much up front about whether something is or isn't okay is just not a good use of time, because that's something they can come back and request either clarification or changes to.
Ultimately, they're going to ask you, if you're going to get funded, to write an abstract summary of the project, written for the general public, and this is what will go on their website. So when you search for awards, this is the thing that pops up for an award. Okay, if your proposal isn't funded, welcome to the club. Okay, so it used to be that the NSF, that actually JMU's funding rate at the NSF was actually north of 30%. It was pretty darn good. It was somewhere between 30 and 35. This was a couple of years ago when I checked. I don't know what the JMU numbers are now, but NSF in general, everything has dropped. And the overall NSF funding rate was like 28% a couple of years ago. Everything has dropped, and that's just the climate we're in. I wish it weren't true, but it is. So don't be discouraged if you don't get funded. A large, significant percentage of people are not going to get funded the first time around. I've only been funded the first time around once. Okay? Every other time it's been a resubmitted proposal. So if you don't get funded, what do? Well, all those reviewers, you can look at the reviews. Okay? So you can go back and look at them and see, all right, what did they like, what didn't they like? Okay? Because they always have to put in strengths and weaknesses for each of these categories. Okay? So look at that. The program officer will then write comments on the proposal as well. Okay, look at those. After you've gotten through your annoyance at the fact that they didn't understand what you were trying to say, then go back and say, okay, usually it's worth resubmitting the proposal, but what do I need to do, right? And it's worth talking to a program officer about that. I will say, I did have one proposal that came back. It was a collaborative between 4 institutions. We all thought it was a great idea, and it came back and it got shelled. I mean, just shelled across the board. And the take-home message from that one was, look, this idea just is not resonating in the community, and it's not worth our time to go back. That's only happened once. It was pretty sobering, because we all thought it was a great idea. Okay, I saw the writing on the wall. But usually, it's worth going back and resubmitting. So, don't do it right away, because you're still going to be annoyed about things that went on. I'll tell you what I've learned, the way I've come around to justify annoying reviews. And that is, usually it means you didn't describe things in a well enough or in a compelling way to make the reviewer really understand what was going on. And you can be annoyed that the reviewer is like, well, that's not what I said, what are they talking? Probably you didn't pitch it well enough. Sometimes it's just somebody who's out to lunch. But anyway, okay. If the proposal is funded, then there's a bunch of stuff you got to do, right? Things have just started. Okay, not only do you have to do the work, but you know, JMU, remember proposals don't get, the PI doesn't get funded, the institution gets funded. So the proposal comes to the institution, then there's a lot of things that need to be set up at the institution to process the work and process the funds, process the proposal, etc., the award. But ultimately the PI does have the responsibility for overseeing the award. Okay? Some places have grant administrators that can help. There are people that are around that will help with these processes. You're going to have to do some various trainings. Okay? Everybody involved in the project has to do responsible conduct of research before they can take any money from the project. Okay? And you're going to have to submit a yearly report on your project. And there's a template, an NSF, an online thing for doing this now. Every year of the project, they want to know what you've been doing, how things are going, what you've published, all that sort of stuff. It's annoying, got to be done.
Just a comment for those folks who came in, like the city training, the responsible conduct of research award, research training now has to be done before you submit.
No.
Oh, did that
It's
change?
the research security training that has to be done before.
Excuse me, I mixed up my city trainings.
And that's new.
It's okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is the training still valid for like 2 or 3 years?
1 year for research security.
The city training?
So the research security training, we're not sure if the city version is valid. There is an NSF developed one that we are working on implementing. And that is valid for 12 months. I believe the RCR training is also 12 months.
It used to be more than that.
Okay.
But
Because it was like 2 years.
Yeah,
and
it
I
was.
just
It
did mine
used to
last
be,
year.
but these things are in flux. I mean, the only way to know is to talk to the people that know.
They're in flux and every agency is changing differently.
Okay, I'm over time. I'm going to stop. I will say, first of all, feel free to reach out to me with any sort of questions, any sort of thoughts on any of this stuff. I'm more than happy to help and to work with people. That's kind of my job. I'm the Research and Scholarship Associate Dean for the college, but you don't have to be in CSM, okay? Feel free to reach out. One thing we're starting to do in CSM this year, College of Science and Math, is we're developing an effective mentoring program for research mentoring based on the SIMMER program, if anybody's familiar with that, run out of University of Wisconsin. So if this is something, I'll be honest, today's the deadline, but we're going to be doing this more than once. This is the pilot program, but if this is something you might be interested in, then sort of developing effective research mentoring with your students or grad students or things like that, this is kind of where we're going. So. And we've talked already about the future of sort of doing this holistically across the university. We're just piloting it in CSM. I'm done. I'm welcome. I know it's a full hour, but if people have questions, I'm more than happy to discuss. Also, I did put two things up here. Some of you got them, I don't know whether everybody did. One is just their checklist for using the Caillou system for internal approval of proposals. So I just stole it from them. The other one is a really short article that was published last year, I think, something like that, or a couple of years ago, by Ravi Shankar, who's our unit head for mathematics, but he and another person in mathematics and physical sciences at the NSF sort of put this short thing together. It's got a lot of interesting, just nuts and bolts about how do I get my proposal funded, so.
If you haven't signed in, please do, the tablet's up there.
Sorry, I talked more than I thought.